That being the case, do I have a motion for the consent agenda, please? Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Do I have a second? Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good evening, Mr. Pollack. And the vote is unanimous. So we can proceed to subcommittee reports. Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Subcommittee met on October 16th. The primary agenda item for that meeting was the discussion of the framework for the FY15 budget development guidelines. The committee had a robust and lively conversation that focused on ensuring that the budget guidelines this year talk in some brief about the budget development process to make sure that we're all clear that how town budget development and school budget development interacts with federal and state budget development, and to ensure that we're clear that how our budget development process decision-making has to be done with the best information available, and often it's not the most complete information. And so we'll spend some time in those guidelines discussing what the budget process is and what that means for us as a committee and for the school administration. The committee also asked that we have a piece of the guidelines devoted to the budget development process for this year in particular, which, given the work of our override study committee, will involve both a maintenance of effort budget, so a budget that essentially looks at operating next year at the same level, or providing the same level of services for next year's population as we are for this year's population, in addition to anticipating potential budget with and without an override. So it'll be a complicated budget process, and the committee asked that we ensure that there be some discussion of our interest in a transparent process, but also one that doesn't have a lot of wild goose chases involved in how we determine what options the school committee and the administration and the town have. That is a technical budget development term, yes. So I look forward to continuing the discussion with the committee, and hopefully we'll have a draft of those budget development guidelines for the committee's review at our next meeting on November 4th. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. Is there any comment or question from the committee? Most of us were there, I believe, right? Okay. Thank you. Let's go to capital improvements then. Ms. Charlepski.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. I'll start off with the proposed vote, and as some of you may remember, we had held this vote when it came up as one of our consent agenda votes. The purpose being that we wanted to discuss it at the Capital Subcommittee, and I wanted to bring it back to you. Just to give people a little bit of background, in case you don't know, some of the audience that may not know, at the high school, when we did the renovations in '94, through whatever, it wasn't '94, it was later, it's 2004, excuse me. No. What?
Longer ago than that.
It was a long time ago. Anyways, we took, there were, at the old Lincoln School, in the auditorium, friezes of the Elgin marbles. Some of you may or may not know that these were what the British Museum stole from the Parthenon back, I think, a while ago, and took them to London for safekeeping. Before they left the Parthenon, there were friezes made, plaster friezes made of these items, and Mr. Lincoln, who was on the school committee, actually had a set made for the Lincoln School because he felt that students should be exposed to the classics and know about them. They were put up in the auditorium on the top, right at the top of the auditorium surrounding it. There are probably, I don't know, how many hundreds of feet? You know, there was quite a bit of it different portions of the western wall, eastern wall, whatever. All that, I'm probably telling you more than you want to know about this artifact that we do have in the schools, and that it's very valuable. When the high school was being renovated, we felt this was something that should be seen by everybody. It wasn't really being seen at the old Lincoln School. So Nancy Heller and myself, along with a number of other people, did some fundraising and were able to install them at the high school, where they are presently, between the second and third floors, where you can see them from the library, from the atrium, et cetera. So if you ever get a chance, that'd be great. So all this long story is to tell you, we had raised all this money, and the $2,064.62 what was left over after we paid the restorer to restore these friezes. And the idea was to use this money to create plaques, a plaque or two plaques, to A, tell the history of them, how we came upon them, and B, to acknowledge the donors who did donate to this very worthy cause. So what I'm requesting today, and actually what we discussed at the Capital Subcommittee, was a vote to accept these funds for the express purpose of creating these plaques, which I volunteered to work on. And Dr. Lupini agreed to maybe ask Ms. Mitchell to see if she would be interested in helping to get this finally done. And so the Capital Subcommittee unanimously voted this item, and I'm bringing it now to the full subcommittee.
So your motion is to use the funds?
Accept the funds and restrict
the
them for
purpose.
the use of creating these plaques.
Great. Okay. So you've made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. So we have a second. Is there discussion? Are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Ditkoff.
Sometimes when one restricts funds, it doesn't cost as much as the fund, so there needs to be some sort of plan B if the funds aren't completely expended.
Well, we would have to make sure we live within our budget. I mean, we would do,
No, I guess I'm saying if there are leftover funds.
if there's more left over.
Right, if you come up with cheaper plaques, you need some sort of plan B to say.
My sense is it's going to cost this, just from my experience with other plaques. I don't know.
I mean, actually, when we talked about it in the finance subcommittee, you talked about if there were remaining funds.
Oh, it would go back to
the
this,
general fund.
yeah.
Does that need to be part of the vote? Usually if you're accepting restricted funds, it would be nice to just say that. Or
Okay.
just amend.
So
it.
that's
If
an
there's any
amendment.
Any funds left over, it would go to.
I'm sorry, it just occurred to
Yeah.
me that it probably needs to be part of the vote.
Can we incorporate that in the initial vote, or do we have to go through the
No,
amendment
let's-
process?
I will, it's a friendly amendment.
Okay. Great. Mr. Pollack.
Are there any explanatory materials that, at present, that explain to
Yes.
students?
And at present, no. I do know that we've used it in our curriculum somewhat when we study Greece,
Because
that the art,
I wonder if there was additional funds after the plaques that essentially told the history of where they came from and acknowledged the donors. It would be great to have like a laminated card that on both sides, that hung on a hook that talked about what was depicted in the marbles, explained the gods and goddesses.
there are
something
some
like
that aren't even at the British Museum, that they somehow either got destroyed or lost along the way, some of the ones that we
But
have.
to have a dozen laminated cards that a group of students
Yes.
could look at that would be nearby the
Well,
plaques. or
that's
something
why
like
I'd
that.
asked if Ms. Mitchell might be able to work together with me to be creative on this and use the money well, so that it could be used both for informational purposes and,
So you'll bring that suggestion to her.
absolutely.
Great. Okay, well, I think we're ready for a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand, please. All those opposed? I see everybody raised their hand, so I know there are no opposed or no abstentions. I'm getting brilliant at this. Okay.
So, the one other piece, we did have a capital subcommittee meeting last week. Was it just last week? Help me. It was last week,
Long ago,
Wednesday.
I missed you all. I could barely remember your faces.
It was last Wednesday, thank you, where we started to look and discuss timelines for the different projects that we have. This is a work in progress will continue to be a work in progress even as we progress through the timelines, because that's the nature of capital projects. The administration took some of the suggestions back and are going to be working further on, together with the building department and the Mr. Kleckner and Mr. Cronin to work further on these timelines and to further hone in on what is possible and where we're at. We are going to be going to the MSBA for a devotion on November 20th. And that's why the capital subcommittee that was scheduled for November 20th has been changed to the 13th, where we will further our discussions on timelines and other issues. Okay?
Okay.
It looks to me like one other piece, the Pierce School Auditorium. I was there 2 days ago, and they were moving along quite well. That day, the risers were supposed to be delivered, and they're supposed to be ready to use the space, I think, in another week or so. So, yes.
I just have a question about the date. This says the capital subcommittee, capital improvements is November 20th?
That's incorrect. We
And
had
what did you
changed that, remember, at the
To
meeting?
Yes, I do
To
remember.
the
but-
13th, and the reason we changed it, because on the 20th is when we're going to, what's it called? To MSBA, and in the morning.
No,
and
but
so
that
you-
says policy. There's just it says that November 13th is the policy review committee.
But also capital improvement.
Underneath is the capital.
No, she has a different one.
No, I have one printed off.
Oh, that you can.
Right.
No, it's at 4 o'clock, 4 to
Oh,
5:30.
Printed it from the
Okay.
email.
I printed it from the
Is
email.
at 8:30.
Excuse me.
Okay? I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chalupsky. Any other questions for Ms. Chalupsky? I think that that spreadsheet that begins to lay out what the timelines are, even though we know it's going to change, is very helpful. Okay, thank you. Ms. Scotto, curriculum.
This is a short and sweet curriculum report. Our November curriculum meeting has been canceled, and our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 17th at 10:30.
Seems very clear.
Very quick.
Okay, Ms. Chalupsky, we're back to you for government relations, I think.
Right, I'm filling in for, I'm channeling, actually, Ms. Stone for government relations, and since I'm going to be doing the voting there, I guess it's appropriate. Ms. Stone and Mr. Morse and I looked over all of these resolutions, which I will go through all together and read out loud, and felt that they all fell within what we had already voted in the past, and so we, felt that we could do this rather quickly. Shall I mean, have people read the resolutions? Maybe I don't, for the public?
Yeah, you could just ask the questions, if there are any questions on any of the resolutions, I think.
Okay, and if the public wants to read the resolutions, they can read them online?
Right.
Right? Okay, better than me reading it. So are there any questions about the Yes, Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman. On the first resolution, I fully support the importance of the schools having enough resources to serve kids who come transient to their doorsteps without enough information. But in my day job, some of those kids come from the Department of Children and Families and are often in emergency or urgent situations that require immediate school enrollment prior to a full extent of information available. And I know we experience that here in other districts, and I just want to make sure that our delegate to the school committees also expresses the importance of making sure that schools are working with the organizations who are sending these kids and are appropriately understanding the urgency with which these kids may be presenting at schools and needing to be enrolled for their own safety and well-being.
I don't think this has, at least from what I read here and what I think I know about it, it has nothing to do with enrolling kids. It has to do with, kids being appropriately placed, kids being, if there's an IEP that goes along with them, that sort of information from a previous school. And some of it you can't get, I think.
So I know this would never happen here in Brookline, but we have had experiences where those issues and lack of information are used to delay enrollment for kids and keeps them in situations that may not be.
They're allowed to do that, the school
No.
districts?
No.
Oh, well,
I just want to ensure that the spirit of this resolution, which is about making sure there's resources to support schools in serving these children as effectively as possible, is true to the spirit, and that there isn't room for school districts to see this as permission not to enroll kids who are presenting with an urgent need for switching schools and enrollment. And I believe you that the spirit of it is not that, but I just think it's important that we have an abundance of caution.
You're gonna
in
make
this
me talk there,
regard. I am.
you're
I'm
next.
gonna make you earn this assignment, Ms. Charlevsky.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. If you want to just send me
I'd be happy to.
that would be great. Because,
just-
I think I got what you're saying, but if there's a little bit more, I can certainly expand
I'd be
a little
happy to make sure I articulate it in writing so that you could share it as a delegate from here. Thank you.
bit. Okay. All right, are there any other questions? Hearing none.
I think we have a question, Dr.
Yeah.
Lupini. Or I'll
Okay, so I will.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I should have done this before. I shouldn't have done it here. Number 4, and please, somebody not note this for the commissioner, because I'm defending him, I suppose. Number 4 feels like a higher standard than we set in the educator evaluation for superintendents, for principals, for teachers.
Which part feels higher?
Well, the last part. I'm not sure of the need to separate that out. Those are some of those, not all, are standards within the. If you're telling me that this says that the commissioner should be evaluated in the same process that we're using statewide with superintendents or principals or whatever, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Is that what it says?
But what I see is that to include feedback, because those are.
Feedback's part of that process.
Yeah, but, so what you're referring to is the local district effectiveness, performance, and morale. And,
Yeah, what I'm trying to stay away from, Dave Driscoll had in his contract that he got salary increases based on district performance, local district performance indicators. I never understood the purpose of that, right, where that fit.
like they're doing now with us with teachers, where. the
They're not
kids'
doing that with us
performance-
with teachers.
The kids'
Excuse me, we're not doing that with teachers.
Okay,
No one in Massachusetts is doing that with teachers.
all right.
I just visited a state where they have a law like that, North Carolina, right? Where they're giving out raises based on evaluations, and it's now going to court. That's not the case here. It was with the commissioner. I don't want to make a big deal out of this. It just reads, if you tell me that this is consistent with the law in terms of how superintendents are evaluated, then I'm good. I just want to make sure it isn't a
Well,
higher bar.
I guess I saw it more as his goals would be for
Fine.
local district effectiveness,
Fine.
performance, and morale.
Told you I
that would
shouldn't
be-
have said anything, Mr. Morris.
Well,
I'm not-
but I think,
And I'm not, this is not something I'm going to go to the mat for, but I don't know,
but I guess
I can vote no.
the question,
No.
the question is whether if you think it's appropriate, you might offer the suggestion that some of this has to do with the goals that should be set consistent with the
Well, we should
way
be making
other.
comments on his goals, that, and other, there could be an extra, but that would seem to me to be,
Does the state board, I don't even know the answer to this, does the state board use a process with the commissioner that's consistent with the process that districts are held to in terms of evaluating their superintendent?
have we ever seen an evaluation of,
Oh, sure.
you've seen it?
Oh, yes.
Well, I haven't.
Not of this one. I just commented a moment ago
On the other one.
on Dr. Driscoll's.
Yeah.
Sure, that process was very, very open. I don't know if this one is or not. I've never seen it.
Well, I think one of the things I can do is at least ask what they do now for
Right.
the state board,
Right.
and
Yeah.
bring that out at least, bring that
Right.
information back, and suggest that they,
Is it
that
consistent with the law that we're using for
that
everyone
somehow
else?
the feedback, I have never been asked for feedback on,
No, and that's the part of this that really makes a lot of sense to me,
you're right.
right? Is because every part of the educator evaluation system is getting some feedback from some of the groups, right?
Right.
Teachers, we're talking about student feedback, right, in that process. Principals, we're talking about feedback from teachers and feedback from students. Superintendents, feedback from the community. I agree, the commissioners should have that as part of that process. I'm just interested in, are they really taking that process that's been defined by the regulations for superintendents and principals, and is that the process they're applying? Is the commissioner going to set goals, right? Are there state goals that we're looking at in terms of his performance, and that people are asked to give feedback on? Is it a process that's consistent with what they're asking all of the rest of us to do?
And I might just add, and will that, like everyone else is asked to do, will that evaluation be public?
Good question.
I think it's supposed to be by law, if I'm correct.
But I certainly have never seen an evaluation of
Never
a.
seen a commissioner's
Right,
evaluation.
so that's also a good, I
Well,
think that's a good issue to
Have
raise.
you ever seen a
Thank you, I
commissioner's
didn't mean to
evaluation?
belabor the point.
No, it's fine, I think it was good. Ms. Ditkoff?
Thank you. I'm sorry, we're still doing that one. Go on.
I just want to make sure I get down, and is it consistent with our own evaluations of superintendents?
With the regulations in place for, yeah, let's pick that one, for superintendent evaluation.
Okay. God, I
sure I
thought this
sup-
was going to be easy this year. I could just sit there and raise my hand. You guys make it difficult.
Oh, it makes it more fun for you.
Okay.
I have one question on one of these five I just don't support, so I'm happy to just vote against it. But on Resolution 5, do we actually know what all of the resolutions and actions approved by the delegate assembly last year were? Meaning, did we last year support, like, this is a pretty broad statement. Resolution 5 says MASC should reiterate its support for everything it passed last year. But if I remember correctly, the Brookline School Committee did not support everything that passed last year. So
No,
if I would,
We actually did, I think we changed the wording on one of them, and I think they accepted it. Do we in the booklet, were the previous resolutions listed there?
I guess all I would amend it to say is that we reiterate our position from last year, whatever that was. I'm perfectly happy voting for us to reiterate our
Well,
position, but since I never went back, personally, I
Yeah.
just never went back and reread everything they actually passed, I would feel more comfortable if it said something like, we reiterate our support for what we supported last year, and if that happens to be the same thing as they supported, that's terrific. But I
Well,
guess blindly.
Remember, the way that this happens is, they will bring up a resolution, there'll be discussion, and then there's a vote. So you either vote it up, or you can try and make an amendment, or you can just vote.
So I
yes
guess
or
all
no.
I would say is for tonight, I would be happy to support a Resolution 5 that said, the school committee reiterates the support for all the resolutions that we approved last year, and instructs
that's my directions to me.
instructs our delegate
Okay.
to do the same. And if that's 100% consistent with what they passed, terrific. And if it isn't, I guess we're giving you the same instructions as we gave you last year. I don't want to vouch for what they ended up passing, because I didn't read it.
Okay. And Ms. Coyne, you'll get me our votes from last year?
Does that
That
seem
would be-
reasonable?
That seems reasonable.
And I don't like the wording of Resolution 2, and I don't think it's worth rewording, so I'm just going to vote against that one. And
I think what part of it is that,
well, it seems to have concluded that my sense of the actual resolution is that the answer is that we allow sufficient time for educators to prepare students for the new testing system and for cities to secure the appropriate, like, I find that an insufficiently worded resolution to vote
I
for.
think it's talking about just having the technology
It's not
available.
what it says.
That's
It
what I read
says,
it.
allow sufficient time for educators to
No.
prepare students for the new
In the
testing
sta-
system.
That's not what I'm reading here on this.
That's what that's what the actual resolution is.
Ah,
I'm reading the actual resolution.
Okay.
I don't support the actual resolution,
okay.
because I don't think that as it's worded, I don't support it, and if they mean something else, then I might support it, but I don't support this. So I'm just gonna vote against that one, and the committee can vote when it says that the MASC call upon the governor to petition the Massachusetts Board and the Board of Elementary or whatever, to direct the commissioner to allow sufficient time for educators to prepare students for the new testing system. I don't understand that, because the whole point is to test the system. So what we will bubble up through a testing process is what doesn't work. So if you allow for sufficient time for I don't like the resolution. Anyway, we don't have to debate it if we don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It also,
please.
it also assumes implementation of Park, which is not, we're not there. We're not there. Park has not been accepted in the Commonwealth, right?
How many districts are doing it this
It doesn't, they're doing a field test.
field test?
That's
right.
different than the state has adopted it. The commissioner laid out for the MASS Executive Committee last week a process by which they were voting in November on a field test that they've already told us that they're doing. Figure that out. That they will vote next year then on implementing. So a decision has not been made by this State Board of Education to implement Park.
And what it says is, whereas, the very first sentence is, whereas the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education has approved the participation of the state's public schools in the Park program.
Haven't-
Okay.
So I think this is a poorly worded resolution. That's the bottom line. I don't think it's 100%.
They will have
accurate.
approved a field test.
Right.
Right. And
That's
they're
very different.
providing the technology, I assume, for the field test if the
Yes.
schools don't
Yeah,
have
the
it.
computers will be rolling in any time.
Anyway, I don't think it's reasonable to direct the commissioner to allow sufficient time for educators to prepare students for the new testing system, since that is what the test is. You wouldn't do that before a test. That is what the test is.
Right?
So this is really a suggestion of a substantive change, which
Well,
personally,
not even to change, to just vote it down.
I would just vote it down. I just don't, I don't support it the way it's written.
Yeah, I think I may agree with you on that.
So are there other comments? Ms. Cotto?
Uh-oh. This was going to be a slam dunk, guys.
No, I agree with Susan as having never looked at this part of it before. But I just wanted to say for the last one, I really, if you have a chance to reiterate to the body that we do really support Resolution 3, in particular the health insurance piece. We spent a lot of time last year talking about the importance of legislation that would but tell private health insurers that they needed to provide certain medical costs. And I would like to see, that's one that I particularly would like to see the lobbying continue by MASC.
You're talking about resolution number 5?
I'm talking about resolution number 3 under resolution number 5.
Oh,
Right.
Whereas.
Actually, that's where
No.
it actually
No,
states
resolution
all the other
Takes
resolutions.
all of the resolutions from last year.
Susan,
Oh,
all of them are right here.
yeah,
Right.
but I don't remember, I did not go through personally and check one by one.
I,
Did Lisa? I don't know if anybody.
she did,
She did, okay.
she did. Yeah, no, all of these, I think we voted. We actually voted to support.
So can I?
yeah?
So let me just say in that list, I know they're not highlighting certain ones, but resolution 1 in that list is the one that where I think I told you last spring that over 80 superintendents showed up
Right.
on the hearing on that bill. I believe that bill has a fighting chance in in the coming year, because it received strong support at the end of last year. A bill very much like what's described in resolution number 1 for a commission to study mandates and the impact on school districts.
It doesn't actually say we shouldn't do it. It says we should study it.
Right. That's right.
And also, number 2, I thought we had tried to get them to change that, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, to raising, shoot, can't remember. There was something about, don't remember. All right, well, so,
I'd like to come back
we
to
don't
the,
have another meeting before
No,
the
we
meeting, so
don't.
we do have to somehow come to some resolutions here
Right.
tonight.
so I'd like to come back for a moment to resolution, sorry about that. Resolution number 2, because I think Ms. Ditkoff has raised a substantive issue regarding that, and I want to make sure that the rest of the committee has had a chance to digest that, because I think that's going to be an interesting vote.
And I think that we will take each one of these individually.
Yeah, I think we
thought at first
better.
we could do it as a group, but I think we will take each one of these individually.
Right.
And just so everybody is aware, we are usually in the minority at these meetings, so that even if I vote no, yeah, just so that you know, it's not,
Well, that's,
as Alan has
You fight the
experienced.
fight.
Oh, but there were several instances in which we made a very substantive suggestion. One, which I recall vividly, had to do with how many people had to actually show up at the board meetings as opposed to how many people could participate long distance electronically.
Yes.
And people who had to travel long ways during the winter were most appreciative of that suggestion that we made, and that passed overwhelmingly. But you're right, by and large, the suggestions I made were not overwhelmingly exciting to most. Yes, Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You fight the fights that need fighting, Ms. Charlowski, not only the fights that you can win.
Thank you, ma'am. Next year, you can go. And I nominate you this year for it.
With respect, I think my dad's card is full, but thanks, thanks for offering.
Okay, so are there any other questions by anyone before we go through these as quickly as we can, one by one? Seeing none, do we have a motion for resolution number 1?
I guess we should look at it as the larger resolutions. you know,
Yes.
So that, that's what we're going to be voting. And I think that I should stipulate here that I would be talking about any suggestions that Ms. Kershaw would bring up in terms of making sure that these students are enrolled in school in a timely manner, or as soon as they come, as soon as they show up, immediately, with as they would any other student. Let's put it that way.
So, based on that, I assume you've made a motion in favor
Yes.
of resolution number 1. Is there a second? Ms. Kershaw? Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor, resolution number 1, raise your hand, please. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Number 1 has it.
Okay, so, resolution number 2. I guess I would vote that I would put forward a motion that I don't know which way to go. That would accept it and then you vote it down, or to put forward the motion that, I'm not.
Well, you're presenting, so you
Yeah,
have the,
I think
you have the
I've
right.
been sufficiently convinced by Ms. Ditkoff that this is not one that makes sense at this point in time.
Okay, so your motion,
Motion
is
to
to-
reject.
to reject.
Resolution number 2.
okay, do we have a second for that? Thank you, Ms. Scotto. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I would like to thank Ms. Ditkoff for bringing it up.
Okay. All those in favor of Ms. Charlupski's motion to vote negative on this resolution, raise your hand. Wow. Ms. Ditkoff, you are impressive. And all those opposed to that, raise your hand. All those abstained. So it's unanimous that we vote down resolution number 2.
See what happens when Rebecca leaves?
Yeah.
Resolution number 3, Ms. Charlupski?
Resolution number, why do these look so different when you look at them in the real life as opposed to what they're saying here? Declares that it's support for additional Chapter 70 money to help districts with teacher evaluation. Okay. I was just reading. I would make a motion that we accept the resolution number 3.
Okay, is there a second, please? Thank you, Ms. Cox. Any other discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Okay, number 4, evaluation of the commissioner. Let me just see what notes I wrote down. I would make the motion that we would try to amend, I guess, this.
Let me say this, I then went back and read what's there as opposed to the individual.
you.
I'm much more comfortable
With what's there?
with what's there. So I think it actually does say that,
Excellent,
what you're looking for.
excellent. And does it say, though, that they are required to do, I'm sorry.
It does say public, it mentions public, it mentions use of instruments to gather feedback. So yeah, and it mentions the process that we're all working under, so I think it
Okay.
captures my comments. Thank
Right,
you.
perfect. So I would make the motion that we accept resolution number 4.
Is there a second? Ms. Cox, thank you very much. Phew, that was tough. Okay, is there discussion? Ms. Charlupski, I would just like to urge you to comment, if you have the opportunity, that you hope that the results are made public in a way that many of us who have never seen such an evaluation before would be able to see it in a timely fashion.
Or maybe we should add to it that we get a copy of the evaluation. That's probably the
I would leave it, just so that it would come to to the attention of all school committees. I don't think you have to add that to the resolution, but I think it's something that you could say about it.
Yeah, I just need to write it down where I'm going to be.
Okay.
and Stuff, so I remember.
Got it.
Okay. I think we have to vote it.
Yeah, so you've moved resolution number 4. And is there a second?
Already seconded.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yes.
How quickly I forget, right? Oops. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. And resolution number 5. Ms. Charlupski.
Right. I would move that we accept all of these, confirming the actions of 2012, because to the best of my recollection, these were all either what we had voted or requested that they changed, that did get changed to vote, to the best of my recollection. And that was, the circuit breaker was the 4 times the foundation formula. That was as opposed to 3 times the foundation formula, and that was something that we had wanted to see happen, the modification of the circuit breaker formula. So I think that, and the health insurance was our own, and funding for the educator evaluation system, I think, is I shouldn't say a no-brainer, right? Sorry about that. And I think is there anything else that anybody sees that, well, let me make the motion that we accept all the previous, we confirm the actions from the previous.
Okay, and I'll second that. All right, is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand, please. All those opposed, raise your hand. We have one opposed, two opposed? We have one opposed and one abstention. Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Charlevsky.
Thank you so much for all your help. I truly appreciate it. And just remember, next year, I am not doing this. I am announcing it now.
I think she said that before.
No, but I mean it now. You only got me because I have to be there anyways, not because of this.
Okay, I think that the policy and negotiations, there's nothing new because I heard nothing from Rebecca Stone. And so unless anybody from any of those subcommittees have anything to say, we're postponing the review of the bullying policy, I think, until November 7. Is that correct?
Right, just that what you will have is on November 7th is the proposal to address the changes of the law
Right.
In the bullying prevention policy, yes.
Right. Okay, so now we're at additional liaison, and how are we with those? I'm sorry, Ms. Ditkoff. How terrible of me, Ms. Ditkoff. Override Study Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the most relevant thing, I think, is that 2 meetings ago, the Override Study Committee broke into a number of working groups, subcommittees. It was about 10 days ago, before the October 14th Columbus Day holiday. And each of those subcommittees has started to meet to prioritize the questions. There are examples such as, there's a municipal committee, there's a fiscal policies committee, there's a school subcommittee, there's, like I said, 8 or 9 of them. So each of those has started to meet. Their task is to come back to the full committee with a prioritized list of questions and a plan of attack for how they want to do that. The World Series is presenting a bit of a problem since it's conflicting with our next meeting. Well, maybe, right. Game 6 is potentially conflicting with our next meeting. So we are slated to meet on October 30th from 6 to 8. Rumor has it that the game starts at 7:30, and so if there is a game, there was sort of a little bit of crankiness, and we want happy committee members. I thought the game started at 8, but anyway, there's some dispute about exactly what's going to happen at 7:30.
I know the times, I
Okay.
didn't look at it.
Anyway, it's not even clear there's going to be a game 6. So we are trying to behave adaptively and prepare for any number of outcomes to this. But the going-in plan, if there's no game 6, the going-in plan is that there'll be both a school subcommittee meeting and a general meeting. In the school subcommittee meeting, we would prioritize the issues that are facing the schools, and in the and then in the full meeting, we would review the reports from all of the subcommittees. So assuming there is no game 6 and/or assuming it's not until 8 o'clock, some version of that will still be the plan. So that's it. I guess the only question for school committee members is that as part of the process 2 meetings ago, there was a list of, if we cut and pasted all of the questions that we've received from all of the committee members on the Override Study Committee and community members, and it was about a 24-page document. So the prioritization process is a non-trivial aspect. So I guess my only request for committee members is, number 1, take a look through that document because it is fairly comprehensive, and also, if there are specific thoughts that you all have on the schools pieces, please funnel them, and we will get them into the mix. We'll get those questions into the mix. It's accessible from the town website, so if you go to the town homepage, there's a link in the carousel to the Override Study Committee, and if you click on it, that is one of the documents posted on the Override Study Committee webpage. This was from the 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. It might have been the 9th or something. It was a couple meetings ago.
Maybe, do you think, Ms. Coyne, that you could extract that document from the website and send it to all school
That'd be
committee
terrific.
people?
That would be really great.
Okay.
The other question I have is, when does the schools subcommittee meeting of the Override Study Committee meet? At what time?
As of now, it's at 6 o'clock that evening.
That's at 6, and when does the full committee meet?
Well, at 7.
I get it.
That's the problem. If in fact there's a game, and if in fact it starts at 7:30, we're gonna have to figure that out. But as it stands now, the school subcommittee was gonna meet at 6, and the full committee was gonna convene at 7:15, whenever we finished.
Here in the school committee room.
Here in the school committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ditkoff. Is that,
That's it.
that's your report? Okay.
That's my
Just
report.
didn't-
Oh, well, I guess the only other thing, and it was on the calendar, which is that we're going to be meeting for each of the next 3 weeks, the 30th, the 4th, 6th, and the whatever 6 plus 7 is, 13, thank you. We will not be meeting each of the next 2 weeks because one of them is town meeting, and then the next one is the day before Thanksgiving, and so we will reconvene on November 4th. December 4th, thank you. December 4th.
Other reports from members? Ms. Chalupsky?
I attended the Beep Connections meeting on Monday. It was held at the Teen Center, actually, and it was really nice because the head of the Teen Center came and joined and talked about, he was there, and also the new director of Steps to Success, in addition to the library, the Housing Authority, the Parent-Child Home Program, the Community Foundation, representatives from all these places, and BAT TV. And it has, and the rec department. This has been an incredible collaboration across town that Vicki Milstein started and has just really taken off with videos and programs on BAT TV for young children to help with literacy, the summer programs and the buy-in from all the different people. The new interim director from the music school was also there. The plan is to continue and enhance some of the projects that they have going, and also possibly have some connections with the Steps to Success kids, doing helping out with some project that with the younger kids. So it was just, a really good feeling of, this is the way town should work, and the way Brookline works, and it's really, can be very proud of the collaboration that happens between all these town groups and agencies, et cetera. So I just wanted to share that with people.
Mr. Chang?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Human Relations Youth Resource meeting last Wednesday, the 16th, and unfortunately, there was no quorum. However, some of the members and public did discuss a number of wide-ranging topics, and it was very lively, and that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Gatto?
Earlier this month, the ECS Parent Advisory Committee had its first meeting of the year. Dr. Lupini and Dr. Fisher-Mueller were there answering questions. The ECS parent group has, of course, concerns about where the program is going, where the program review committee is heading, and what will happen to them over the course of the year. And I think that both Dr. Fisher-Mueller and Dr. Lupini were very reassuring about the fact that it is an important program in Brookline, and that we are looking, they are looking at, the committee is looking at the programs all over the country where there are outstanding models that we might be able to emulate in Brookline. Some of the concern is about the use of technology. I think that there are parents on the committee who fear that computers will be the new wave of the program. But I think that Dr. Fisher-Mueller and Dr. Lupini were able to assure them that they had a much broader conception of what this kind of education could mean and the role that technology would play in it. So I think that while parents remain concerned, I think that this helped alleviate some of their greatest fears.
Great. Ms. Chalupsky, you have a question?
No, I had another,
Okay, well, Ms. Kershaw, I'm on to Ms. Kershaw now, and I'll promise to come back to you.
no problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tomorrow is the regular monthly meeting of the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee here at 8:30 Town Hall. And two other quick things from the CPAC world. One is I wasn't able to attend, but I know that there was the first in what I think will be a series of conversations with special education parents at the high school. And I know this was something that was requested by CPAC last year, that we really pay attention to communicating with the parents there. So I want to thank the administration for doing that. And I know it's been a really important piece of them feeling responsiveness and changes at the high school. The other is we've had, I had an inquiry from CPAC regarding sort of how special education families, parents are represented on building committees as they unfold, and how we make sure that as the schools are being built that we have sort of special attention around issue of kids with special needs. So I thought I would bring that here and just make sure we're paying attention to that in the capital committee discussions and as we're putting parent groups together for the schools, and I'm sure we do.
I think we do, but I think we also ask the professionals for advice. So I remember distinctly there were issues about colors at Heath School, and busyness in a classroom, and how some kids with autism need a quieter background to sort of work from, and that was addressed by the professionals in the school. So even if there isn't a parent per se, the issues are there, and we do address them when the architects talk with the professional, with the teachers, and with the special ed personnel.
So, may I?
Sure.
So I've given this answer at forums when I've been asked that question. It is everything that Ms. Charlevsky said and more, and the example that I often use is an original design, one of the original designs at Runkle, which took a look at learning support classrooms and other types of classrooms and had them placed in places where we didn't believe they belonged. That is, they were separate from the grade level, the grade span classrooms. And we moved them there. We moved them to be with we moved the K-2 classroom to be with the kindergarten and first and second grade classrooms. The other thing is, even if we hadn't done that, there's a review required in building programs. The public doesn't often hear about this piece because it's kind of a non-public piece, right? There's a review by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and their special education office is one of the sign-offs of any building project. And so and they make a number of recommendations, always. And we appreciate that, actually, because it's very helpful.
May I ask a question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At what point in the process is the ESC's special education?
It's a very good question. It's and I don't remember specifically, but it's at some percentage of the design. It's in the design phase.
Okay.
And right, and it's I'll guess, and I'm probably wrong. It's at around the 50% design phase. that the design goes to the department for comment.
It may even be further
It-
along.
it may.
Because so much
May.
changed between 50 and 75%, because
Right.
that's what's supposed to happen.
That's a very good point.
So-
But there's a part in that process where there's a sign-off.
So,
And
may I-
that, by the way, is after, it's after we've gone through everything that Ms. Charlevsky talked about, including our own internal people who are involved in those processes.
So I think that's an excellent, very thorough explanation. And so I might just request that Dr. Schmuckler present that at a CPAC meeting, that we ask them to put on the agenda how our building projects generally inclusive of the need. and
We're
what other
happy to come and
process-
do it.
Or
I
you
mean, we're more
come.
involved. I've done it before, twice,
Okay.
at those meetings, and I'm happy to come do
Oh.
it again.
Nothing
Mr.
new
Duff.
under the sun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on this topic, one of the subjects that came up at one of the Driscoll Q&As was about the multiple renovation projects that we're contemplating at the K-8s, and if there are cohorts, this was asked by a parent who was specifically interested in special education, about whether we were contemplating any impacts on certain groups of kids who would get sort of hit twice, essentially. They might be in their building, moved out for renovation, moved back into their building, they go to the high school, they get moved out, they get moved back in. So it's something that we assured them that we were worried about also, we were paying a lot of attention to. I'm certainly paying attention to it for all of our children, not just special education children, but at the end of the day, I think it is something, as we think about the impacts of renovations on kids across the board, that's something to pay attention to. But I do think that there's going to be a specific interest among special education parents, if you haven't heard it already, on this front.
So if I can, at both the Devotion and Driscoll forums that I did, we were asked that question, both in general and about special education, and what we committed to in this process that Ms. Charlevsky talked about earlier. That is the transition plan and how we move into these buildings as they're built, is to be able to map out the different grade levels and different populations within those grade levels and how they would be impacted. That's very different than being able to say that kids won't be impacted multiple times. I believe in some cases they will, and I don't believe that we'll be able to avoid some of that, but we certainly are going to understand what we're wading into up front and be able to be up front with parents about what we're wading into. And the other piece that I did say at both of those forums is we're going to pay closer attention to certain programs in certain buildings, right? Because we know that while we want to minimize the transitions for all kids, there are certain populations that we really need to pay close attention to minimizing those transitions for, and we will. Yes.
Great. Ms. Charlevsky?
Yeah, I had one other sort of, it's not somewhat a liaison, because I'm the early childhood liaison. Both Ms. Kershaw and I attended a very interesting Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge Grant event at the Federal Reserve Building yesterday, where we listened to, both the Commissioner of DESA and the Commissioner for the Department of Early Education and Care speak. But more importantly, this was hosted by WGBH and talked about technology and its use with little kids, and was really quite an eye-opener. And there was a physician from Children's Hospital who spoke, Michael Rich, who is actually a Driscoll parent, and was very interesting in terms of what he had to say about the use of technology and as a tool, and I just think he might be somebody we would want to consider possibly at some point to have come and talk, or possibly talk at the high school for like their conversazione. It could be a very, or in terms of what, he's doing more research on the media and children and its effect on children. So that, I don't know if you wanted to add anything more, Ms. Kershaw, but it was really a very interesting day.
Great. Others? So I have the privilege of being on the committee which is helping the search for a new town council that is now getting underway and is clearly committed to developing a diverse pool of candidates, and the people on it, which include our own Angela Allen, and Sandra DeBow, who is the Human Relations Director for the town, and Betsy DeWitt, Chairman of our Board of Selectmen, and Sandy Gasby, the town moderator, as well as two attorneys, Stephen Wright and Bernard Green, and also Janet Fearman, Chairman of the Building Commission. So it's really, I think, a very lively committee, and I think it's being very diligent in its discussions about the qualities that we're looking for and how we're going to advertise it. Okay. If there are no other such reports, it's time for public comment. Ms. Coyne, is there anyone who has signed up? So no one has signed up. Is there anyone in the audience who didn't sign up who wishes to make a public comment? Seeing none, we've gained 15 minutes back of the 35 minutes we've lost. So now, Jonathan, I believe we have a student report?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Thank you.
No charge.
So I was talking with Ms. Holman this week, deciding what I wanted to say to you guys. And she said, there's one thing that you have to mention, and I had a couple guesses, and I couldn't guess it, and what you this is a joke, but what I'm
Suspense is killing us.
Ms. Holman won the Brookline Dancing with the Stars, that fundraiser. So congratulations to her. I thought that was, she has a trophy in her office. It's pretty neat.
What a great idea.
So in other news, French exchange came and went. There was a group of students from France who came to Brookline and shadowed students, also learning French, and so I saw a couple of them in my classes, and they were shy, but the host families and the exchange students, they really bonded. It was a kind of fleeting experience, but you could see that there were those bonds that were there, and that was really cool. Also, China Exchange, the principals from Kaohsiung High School came to visit Brookline recently. In policy, there was Ms. Holman implemented a 2-week drop ban on classes. So students who, part of the scheduling is that students find out earlier on. So the previous spring, roughly what classes they're going to get. So there's a greater level of there's a greater level of commitment going into the school year about what classes you're going to take. So the point of the drop ban is that once you start the school year, you have to wait 2 weeks before you can drop a class that you think you might not like. And what happens is that some kids kind of get cold feet about their ceramics class or maybe their AP US history class. And, by the 3rd day, they want to drop it, and they're really scared, or, maybe they got a bad vibe from the teacher. But, after the 2 weeks, they stick it out, and they like it. And I think that the ban is the policy kind of goes back to, that thinking that, it takes 3 weeks to form a habit. And in that same way, 2 weeks, you might come to enjoy something you might not thought you would have enjoyed. So that's been a success mostly. So that's been good. Also, legislature and student council elections were this past month, and we we've just met a couple times, so, we're still working out exactly what's on our agenda. But we'd like to reach out to the other legislative, governmental bodies of Brookline High School, so faculty council, judiciary, and we'd also like to reach out to school committee. There are a couple things that we're planning, and nothing is finalized, but one thing we're interested in changing is the elective policy, which I won't into too deeply right now, but just stay tuned for that. And also, back to school night was I think last week. And that was also a big success. Lots of parents came. There were junior and senior mentors who helped out. Directing, helping parents find their kids' classes. And I'm a junior. I'm a senior mentor, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there. But I heard it was a great time. And there's lots of positive feedback from the parents. Looking forward, college applications, the early deadline is November 1st. That's coming up really soon. So, there's a lot of stress in the senior class. And also, Ms. Holman wanted me to tell you guys that, or remind you that, if you take a look at the calendar, the VHS 21st Century Fund Gala is coming up soon. Yeah.
Will she be dancing? Oh, sorry, John.
I'll ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Yu? Mrs. Scotto?
A comment and two questions. I did notice on the 21st Century Fund invitation that it said that she was offering a dance class
Oh, very
as
cool.
part of the auction. So, you can think about whether you want to bid on it. But I did have a question. It sounds to me as if the 2-week ban is a very good thing that's been put into place. But I wonder what happens if at the end of 2 weeks you decide the class isn't for you and you drop it. I'm wondering how easy it is to fill your schedule in with something else after you've missed the first 2 weeks of the course. I wonder if there has been any discussion that you've heard or.
I'm not too sure about that. I could get back to you on that.
I can help you. I can help with part of it. I mean, based on the data that we review of sections, class sizes, et cetera, there are a number of openings across the schedule, more so in elective areas than some other areas. But I've not had any discussions with the headmaster that would lead me to believe that there's any difficulty for students, any more difficulty given the 2-week ban than there was when we were using a different set of policies in terms of students filling their schedules.
Were you asking the question of filling their schedules or
Filling their
being
schedules
caught up?
Also, you
Oh, you-
lose the first 2 weeks of
Yeah.
a class. That's also a difficulty. But that may be just what you have to confront if you choose to do that.
Well, and I've seen just some things on the professional conference from the high school. I mean, this was really well laid out for staff. So I think there's been some adjustment by staff to understand that there were going to be some changes in that 3rd and 4th week, whereas before they may have occurred earlier, and there was going to be some need to work with students around what that meant.
Right. Good. Thank you.
So I'm curious, what town in France are the students from?
I actually don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
I can get back to you on that too.
Great. So Dr. Lapini, I think it's your turn.
It is, thank you. I have a few items on the written report that you have, the first of which is that we plan to bring you a calendar soon, within the next 2 meetings. I pointed out here that we've asked the BEU to give us feedback on a proposed calendar which would have teachers start on the 27th and 28th of August, and students begin the Tuesday immediately following Labor Day. That is the predominant calendar used in the Metro West. But we need, our calendar then would allow the school year to conclude without any cancellations on June 16th, 2015. We have language in our contract at present that says that the BEU must sign off for us to start before September 1st. And we're hoping to hear back from them in the next week as to where they would stand on that, whether they would grant that, whether they would have to take a vote of membership, or whether they simply turn us down. Allison Steinfeld is our new Director of Planning and Community Development. Mr. Rowe and I met with her last week about the Hancock Village proposal to get an idea of where that stands, what next steps are, and quite frankly, what the next steps are as they might concern enrollment projections, those kinds of things that could come out of that proposal. It's very early in that process. She's terrific and was very helpful on a number of different levels with the proposal, but there aren't a lot of answers right now. But we all feel that Mr. Rowe, I know, agrees with me that we believe we're going to be able to work very closely with the planning department to make sure that we have answers on these questions as we move forward. I won't go into the conversations. You have them. They were on your calendar and they're listed here. Last night we began a series of learning opportunities for our leadership team and vice principals and the assistant headmaster and our deans. Principals had expressed, as a senior staff over the last couple of years, that there were two things that we were really interested in trying to do. First was to carve out time for our own learning, because leadership team meetings on a Monday afternoon when we're trying to do business and put together budgets and those kinds of things don't lend themselves well to that. And the second thing was to have an opportunity to spend more time with our vice principals, who we didn't have an opportunity to include in those leadership team meetings. And this is the vehicle that we created in this year's calendar. There are 6 of them throughout the year. We began last night with a discussion of Paul Tuff's book, How Children Succeed. Our second session is going to be with the authors of the Understanding Brookline report in November. We're really looking forward to that. And in December, I'm not remembering the date, we're going to be with Alan November, right? Alan November, who's done a lot of writing on technology and the integration of technology in the classroom, is going to be with us, and we're very excited about that. So we're off to a great start. The best part on a number of different levels, as I said last night, is that our principals have, 8 of them, have actually taken the lead on planning these. And they're putting together the programs, they're putting together all the tasks for the evening. So we created a vehicle, and they are just very excited about it, and 8 of them are leading that, and I really appreciate that they've done that. We mentioned the transition space earlier. The only thing I'll mention in this that we did mention at that last Capitol meeting is that the old Lincoln School will be a key part of that transition plan to our building program. We don't know the specifics of that, but we are projecting in these preliminary plans that we've started to put together elementary usage beginning in September 15. And high school utilization beginning in 2019. I should say September 2019 there. It's been mentioned in terms of the Override Study Committee and the October 30th Game 6 meeting. Some of the things that we're putting together for the school subcommittee on our current budget challenges, future budgets, and technology for that evening. And we will then circle back and discuss those with Finance Subcommittee and the School Committee the following week, and with our leadership team the following week. Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I will be going to a park field test meeting on Thursday, October 31st, Game 7, October 31st day, which is geared toward the pilot program, which, as we understand it now, will impact all schools in Brookline except the high school. We have not received notification. You recall, I think, that they had originally assigned a couple of assessments for the high school. We actually didn't have the courses for the assessments that they wanted to pilot here, field test here. So they excluded Brookline High School from those and have not substituted any other park assessments. So it looks like right now the high school will not be piloting any part of park, but every other school will. In some schools, multiple grade levels. That's my report. Questions?
Ms. Jolovsky?
So what are the courses we don't have that they,
It was an integrated math course.
what does that mean?
What is an integrated math course?
Sorry, yes.
An integrated math course is really a course that where math concepts from across geometry, algebra are taught in a more practical fashion, I'll say. There's a lot of the Common Core is based on math being taught in an integrated fashion. We are working toward some of those courses. We don't have them in place. Some other districts do. For some reason, the department made this mistake in a number of systems where they assigned this particular assessment to schools that did not yet have the course in place. We did indicate to them that we were willing to pilot tests in algebra, geometry, any of the other areas, but we have not heard back from them. Remember, there won't be pilots in the 10th grade because the students are still taking the high stakes test there. And we are getting closer. We're going to wait till after October 31st, but come October 31st, I believe we will be informing, working with principals to inform parents that we will not require students to take the MCAS if they're to take one of the park assessments in that grade level. I should say to you, and I can do more on this the next time we meet, that the department has put forward 2 different proposals for calculating school accountability ratings in the case where districts opt out of a test at a particular grade level. The one that our principals liked the most was a proposal where the department would look at what your rating for the school would look like if you included the students at that grade level who still took the test, and if they weren't included and you received the higher rating, whichever it is. So, example, Lawrence School has a 4th grade assessment in English Language Arts for 2 classes. We know they have 4 classes. So first the department would calculate the school's accountability rating, including the 4th grade, those 2 4th grade classes that are still taking the MCAS, and then they'd calculate it excluding them. And whichever was the higher score, that would be the accountable rating for the Lawrence School. That seemed to work for us. I'm not sure if it works for other schools, but the department has exhibited some flexibility on looking at this issue of accountability in this pilot year. There, I gave the department credit. Did you mark that down?
I did.
Thank you.
They want it to work.
Ms. Kershaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you just remind us, Dr. Lupini, what for the kids who take the park, what do the parents receive? Well, they will not get an MCAS score for their kids? Or the kids will take both? No.
So remember, the students will still have to take the MCAS if they're taking an end-of-the-year assessment in park. If they're taking one of the performance-based assessments, we can opt them out. That's what we're looking to opt them out. That's where we're looking to opt them out. Parents will then not receive an MCAS determination in that particular subject area for that year. No student will be opted out of both math and English Language Arts. So if I have a 5th grader and this is being done in my school, I may not get an English Language Arts determination for that year, but I will get a math score. Okay?
Mr. Yu?
It's kind of unclear to me what the difference is between Park and MCAS, because both seem to be kind of statewide assessment, standardized assessments, for students. And what is the difference?
So Park is a consortium of 18 states. There are 2 of these national consortium that have been created to develop assessments. Massachusetts belongs to Park, and there's a second one I never remember the name of, and I always end up looking at Dr. Fisher-Mueller, who's not in the room for that particular name of the assessment, but we're not members of that group. They are designed, if rigorous enough, if determined to be rigorous enough by the respective states, to replace whatever the statewide assessment is in that particular state. So Massachusetts went into this with the full intent that Park could replace MCAS. But right now, we're in a beginnings of a process of field testing it, so that the Commonwealth can make a determination as to whether we're going to replace the assessment. There are a number of major differences. I can give you the link to the website if you want to see some of the sample questions and whatever. You might enjoy looking at those. But one of the main differences for school systems is that the assessment is technology based. Meaning that while in these first couple of years there will be a paper copy available for students in schools that don't yet have the technology capability, that down the road this is meant to be an assessment based in technology that students will take on a pad or at a computer station, and involves, and some of us are worried about some pieces of this, involves students doing some movement of data using the technology. There's a English language arts assessment question that asks students to drag and drop, right, a particular response, to move it across the, right, and not every student understands what that means, no matter how proficient they may be with technology. My children are very proficient with their cell phones, but I don't know that they necessarily know what drag and drop means. Right? So we have a long way to go in this assessment, but it's intended in most of these states. They're based on the Common Core, which has been adopted in Massachusetts and 40 some other states, to replace. Yeah, it is to replace these individual statewide assessments. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Smarter Balance. Thank you. Smarter Balance is the name of the other consortium developing an assessment.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lupini. Now we have Pete Rittenberg. Pete, I want to apologize. If I'd really thought about it, I would have let you go ahead of Dr. Lupini. You would have been able to get out of here earlier. That's my fault.
I have to go across the BU bridge, so probably the later I go, the better.
Okay, you make me feel better. That's very politic of you.
And thanks to everybody again for devoting some time to this issue. This is our 5th year of the so-called Rule 53, 8th grade. And this year, or 8th grade waiver, this year it is for boys ice hockey only. And just a reminder that last spring, we all voted and moved along the girls' cooperative team. And our district does not allow both, so I met with principals.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Met with principals and Dr. Lupini a few weeks ago. And just, if anybody is asking why there is no 8th grade for the girls, is because there is a co-op and we cannot have both. So with this year, we're asking for the 8th grade waiver for the boys only. This waiver has been very successful over the last 5 years. I think it has exceeded our expectations. We are projecting, you can see in the letter, we're projecting 30 returnees. We don't know yet. We're just underway with our registration process. And so we don't know everybody that's coming, especially in terms of 8th graders right now. But projections in conversations with youth hockey, it looks like we may have 40 total in the program this year, which is more than double what we had 5 years ago. It's a very healthy program. Those numbers support, full varsity and JV teams. The 8th graders would be playing at the JV level only. And, it just really has been a win-win, I think, all around. It sustained us. It helps families. With our now 300 is still relatively cheap in the hockey world. So we know anecdotally that there are several student athletes who are included in our programs who otherwise probably wouldn't have continued with hockey, but it's an affordable option. And
like I say, it's just worked out great on the boys' side for us. So I know some of you are new or newish, but I'm happy to answer any of the specifics, what the rule is or how it works. I'm not sure if you want to take that time or not, but any questions? And then-
Questions from the committee? Yeah, I don't want to take any more time than is
Yeah.
necessary.
Again, I really appreciate the support. It's worked out fabulously. And I
So-
guess the last thing I would say is just not, well, you've heard, you've probably heard there are more students coming to the high school in the next few years. But between numbers in youth hockey that we see and knowing that there will be more students coming to Brookline High, this may, in the next couple of years, have, served its purpose and kind of run its course. So we'll evaluate at the end of the coming season and, maybe 1 or maybe 2 more years and we'll be, I think, fully sustained at the high school. That's what it looks like.
Ms. Chalupsky?
I'm sorry, but I guess I didn't understand what you said about the girls and co-op.
We are in a cooperative team agreement now with Newton South.
Oh, okay,
So
yes.
by combining the 2 schools' players, we are not, both schools were involved in 8th grade waivers in previous years, but we are not allowed to do both. You can't have 2 schools together and include the 8th graders as well.
So curiosity, what is the team called?
That's their first team building exercise. They have to name themselves. We've heard.
New line.
What was it, the So New, I don't know, So New Bro Lions or something
Oh,
like that.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Axel Lapini.
So I wouldn't have asked this unless you just said what you just mentioned. As you, maybe you haven't even looked, but as we've looked at any of the youth programs, have we seen huge increases in those programs that match our enrollment?
I don't want to confidently say that.
Sure.
But the numbers are up in
They're
youth
up.
hockey,
And
boys
and
and girls.
other youth programs?
I'm not, I don't want to say.
And I wonder, are we seeing it in
I think so.
baseball?
There
and
must be
what-
more kids.
There must be.
Although baseball, if you wanted to talk about baseball, I think lacrosse is pulling a lot away from.
Yeah, sure.
Lacrosse is the fastest growing sport. So, there are more kids out there for sure, and the participation trends probably follow what we see nationally.
Great, thank you.
So do we need a vote?
I think you want to vote, yes.
Okay.
So we've been through, all the other levels and then
Signed
the
off.
state, right.
So we need a vote to waive the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association Rule 53? Is that what we need to do?
Support the waiver.
To support the waiver. Sorry, to support the waiver. Sorry about that. Right. Okay. So I'll make that motion since I messed it up first time. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Kershaw. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? The ayes have it.
I just want to say that Pete's done a really marvelous job with this, both in terms of the work that he did when he first came to us with the proposal in the men's and women's program, and in the work he did with Newton to do that co-op arrangement, and in the continuation of this. When he comes to elementary principals, they all speak highly of the work of the coaches and the athletic department in working with their 8th graders and keeping them informed. It's just a terrific job you've done on this, Pete, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks again for your support.
Thank you.
Go Sox.
Dr. Allen, can we invite you up? Certainly.
So, as Dr. Allen comes to the podium, this is the second year that we've done this formally, where Dr. Allen details here her work with principals and coordinators in terms of our hiring that went on during this year. as well as some of the strategies that she's been instrumental in bringing to our hiring practices that we believe are making a significant difference in those practices at the building level and in our administrative level. So, Dr. Allen, I appreciate those efforts and certainly appreciate you putting this presentation together. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I like to start with briefly framing what you should expect from this presentation. I will, in general, provide you with an overview of the terminology as well as required demographic data gathering and reporting processes. And when I talk about terminology, the terminology that I will be using for this presentation, you'll hear more about that in a bit. Additionally, I will provide you with general information about some of the district's overall teacher demographics. More specifically, I will provide you with the hiring profile of our newest educators to the public schools of Brookline. And lastly, I will share with you our next steps that include our recruiting and retention efforts. So let's spend a bit of time talking about the terminology. And why it's significant is because this is the terminology that is used in the data gathering and reporting processes, the required reporting for demographic data. So I think I would be remiss to stand here and present as if I am an expert on race and ethnicity. I am not. So I like to also acknowledge that we could probably have a year-long conversation about race and the history of its definition in this country, but we're not going to do that. So for the sake of this presentation, I'd like you to just know that I am defining race as the following. Give me 1 second here. Race is essentially defined as a large group of people distinguished from one another or from their physical appearances. Ethnicity is identified as groups of people distinguished from one another from their physical appearances that include their history, their ancestry, their culture, their language, their origin, as well as physical type. In diversity is simply, apologize, this is a different view than what I had looked at earlier. So diversity generally means that many people from many different culture groups are present in the organization and the life of the organization. And those various culture groups can include, again, race and ethnicity groups, but as well as religious groups, as well as sexual orientation groups, people with varying abilities, power, and privilege. All of those are various groups that would be characterized as diversity. Inclusion is when you have representation of those people from those groups present in the organization and in the life of the organization. So with that, and the definitions, those came from a book that we use in the district with our school leaders, which is from Lindsay and Robbins and Terrell, Culturally Proficiency, a Manual for School Leaders. So if you're interested in reading a bit more, please see this resource. Those definitions are really important because the reports that we are required mandated to submit the data to there are two of them. One is the Equal Opportunity Commission report, which is the EEO-5 that gathers information about elementary and secondary educators. It's a biannual report that occurs where we have to submit data during the even years. What you will notice with that report, there are only 6 categories, and they actually combine race and ethnicity. So there's non-Hispanic white as a category, non-Hispanic black, Hispanic, Asian or Pacific Islander, American Indian, or Alaskan Native. So when we gather that data from our employees, they do not have an option to select more than one. You are asking people to put themselves in one box. So I find that appalling, to be perfectly honest with you. as probably 50, as our new, if we have 55% of our new teachers who are under the age of 30. I think they do as well. In fact, they've told me such. So I share that with you because it shows you how limited this report is. And I know that many of our community members, they look to this report to kind of figure out what our demographics are like. I think it's flawed, but we are still required by law to submit this information. If I am a Hispanic and Black, I can't choose two in that category. I have a teacher this year that identifies himself as a Dominican Republic. He wanted to choose two. So he could put two, but technically we're only allowed to report one. So that's the EEO5 report. The next report is the EPIMS report. It is a report that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education requires us to submit. Now this is a bit better. It actually breaks up race and ethnicity. As you can see, for race, you can be you can be white, Black, or African American, Asian, Native American, or Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. It also has options where you can check two things for ethnicity. You can be Hispanic or Latina, or not Hispanic or Latina. So once you look at all of those combinations, there are 63 possible categories. However, I might be able to check 4 of those categories. It will come out when we get that report. If you go to the department's website, when you go home tonight, it says multiracial. Again, this is limiting. So, for the sake of this presentation, rather than drill down into these individual groups, I will move forward and characterize anyone who belongs to this group as a teacher who is, last year you may recall we said non-white. I've been told by some teachers they find that offensive. Most people find all of these things offensive, so let's recognize that, because that means that it's negative. I'm not white, so something must be wrong with me. So this year I decided to use the language that is used in the governor's office, as well as language that is used at the Department of Education level in terms of their work with the Task Force on Diversity. And from that point, we will talk about teachers that belong in these culture groups as teachers of color in the public schools of Brookline. So here is just some overall demographic data for our entire staff. A couple of weeks ago, maybe even a week ago when I was preparing this presentation, we have 793 professional staff. Those are all of our teachers, including our personnel support services staff. So of the teachers of color, that number, 10% are teachers of color. The gender number, 80% of our teachers are female. In the country in general, about 85% are female. So that's just an aside with that. The age range, you might notice, there are 39% of our teachers under the age of 35. Nearly half of our teachers are over the age of 40. On average, the number of years of teaching experience is 9 years. So now I'd like to drill down a bit more and talk about the hiring profile of our educators for this current school year. Of the 6 administrators that we hired, 3 were administrators of color, and you met many of them a few weeks ago when they were introduced. Of the 68 professional staff, those are our teachers, 10 of 68, 15%, are educators of color. We hired 97 paraprofessionals, and 22% of our aides of color are of color. And I think that's something we should look at, given that every year a certain percentage, and I'll talk to you a bit more about this in a little bit, a certain percentage of our aides are actually hired as teachers. So I think there's a strategy that we should be considering that's embedded in that data point. So here, did you get, I'm sorry, I think we had that one. So people are very much interested. So you just saw the age demographic, the gender demographic, and we know people are very much interested in one of our areas of diversity, and that is race and ethnicity. So I wanted to give you a little bit more specific information there. So of our new teachers hired in the district this year, 85% were white and 15% were teachers of color. Of new teachers last year in comparison to last year, it's relatively same, slight difference, two less teachers. Overall, we're making some great progress in comparison to the state. The state's numbers have been fairly consistent over the past several years. In fact, the state is now making a concerted effort and has an initiative where they are working to increase the number of educators of color in the pool. So, and I'll tell you a little bit about some of those strategies. They've just identified a task force to work on some of those issues. I wanted to point out here as well, the number of teachers in the United States that are white are about 84%, and the number of women teachers that are female in the United States is also about 85%. So how do we compare to comparable districts? These are just a few that I thought you might find interesting. Compared to our suburban districts, and I know I should be careful putting Brookline over there completely on the suburban side. I feel like we could be right there in the middle. But as you can see, the percentages of teachers of color for the past school year, we exceeded those districts. I've actually talked to some of my colleagues in these other districts, and we have exceeded them in the hiring of teachers of color this year as well. On the contrary, Boston and Cambridge, they have far more teachers of color in those districts, and there are probably lots of reasons that we can attribute to that. One in Boston, well, one obviously, hopefully it's obvious to you as I think it could be, is there is an increased number, not an increased number, there's a greater percentage of people of color in both of those towns, far greater percentage than the people of color that live in the town of Brookline. One of the other things, and we'll certainly talk to you more about this as well, and I'm actually having a conversation next week from the diversity coordinator in Boston Public Schools, is they have a program that's a teacher residency program where they train people who are career changers, and they do internships in the public schools of Boston. It's a year-long program. They obtain their licensure, and they're committed to teaching in Boston for 3 years. And we'll talk more about that. I do think that's something that we should consider and explore. So this is what these percentages look like. This struggle is not unique to Brookline, as you can see. It's common with our suburban districts. Not only that, it's persistent at the state level, it's persistent in this country for a number of reasons. One being that there's a lack of influx, there's a lack of teachers in the pipeline. There are not very many teachers of color in the pipeline. So, and here's some other relevant facts as to what our challenges are. So, as I said earlier, the Department of Education has launched a task force to look at increasing educators of color in the workforce. Some of the issues and challenges in the Commonwealth, we have some teachers of color. 34% of them are over the age of 54. We're going to be losing a lot of them very soon. So we have to figure out what are we going to do to get more of them in the pipeline. We have a few ideas, but it probably isn't enough. The other thing is, only 20% of the teachers or people in education programs that are taking the MTEL test, that is the test that is required for licensure for a teaching license, are teachers of color. 80% are white. So that tells you there are not a lot of people signing up to take that test. So if we look at the pool of young people or career changers coming out of education programs, only 20% are in the schools of education or the colleges of education. So one of the things that the task force has done is it has a couple of targets. One of the targets is related to students. and practices to improve inclusion and diversity of students. The other target is directly related to increasing educators in the workforce. So they have been very deliberate in and specific in what they like to see happen over the next 5 years, which, you know, we have 10%. We've been fairly consistent with 10%, but they like to see a growth in the teachers of color from about 3% from 2013 to 2018. So, that's a very quick snapshot of what the demographics look like. But there are lots of questions, and I think we're on track with some strategies. But, you know, the big question is, what can we better do to diversify our teaching staff, and what should be our next steps in making more progress? We're making some progress. What should we do to make more progress? So, you know, we need to clearly articulate and be intentional in our next steps, as well as our recruitment and retention efforts. So I'd like to share with you what I would outline as some of the general next steps. First, I think as a community as a whole, we need to embrace diversity as an indicator of excellence. Just how we identify high achievement and teaching as standards of excellence. But more importantly here, what I like to point out is diversity does not compromise excellence of our teaching. They go hand in hand. So when I say we have to embrace it, I'm talking about looking at diversity and excellence of teaching going hand in hand. One does not compromise the other. The other thing that I think we should consider doing is expanding our definition of diversity beyond race. As you can see, the pool is limited. Doesn't mean we will stop the work we are doing to look for teachers of color, but we need to think about how are other culture groups represented in our educators in Brookline. Do we have representation of all socioeconomic income levels? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just raising that. Do we have representation from various religious backgrounds? Do we have representations of gay, straight, lesbian, transgender in our teaching staff? Do we have representation of, let's see, what am I missing here? Of adults who are learning. I'm looking at Dr. Smuckler to make sure I get this right, of adults who are challenged and with learning disabilities. Hope I did okay there, Dr. Smuckler. So that's one of the things I think we need to consider. You know, I'm all on board. I was at a meeting recently with my Job Alike colleagues, and we are all on board with collaborating with the Department of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education, on looking at the recommendations for diversifying the educator workforce. Some of the things they're suggesting are things that we are already doing in Brookline, and I'll share a couple with you. One is people like to work in places where they're welcome, where people know something about their culture. It's not just an appreciation or awareness. There's an understanding of the culture for which you belong to. And so clearly there's a list of people who are participating on this task force. And of the 4 or 5 recommendations that they have come out with so far, one of them is to think about requiring cultural proficiency licensure. In addition to that, they are talking about starting a culturally proficiency academy so that our educators can go and learn about cultural proficiency. So this is something that we've been embarking on, engaged in, I might even say, in the public schools of Brookline for a few years. I shared this book a few minutes ago, but I like to share it again because all of our leadership team members are using this book. When we think about our new educator evaluation and cultural proficiency there, this is a reference for us. And we're continuing to explore cultural proficiency and what it looks like and sounds like and feels like in our schools, in our classrooms. So that's one of the strategies they're talking about. One of the other strategies they're talking about is creating a pipeline of educators, not necessarily in college, but high school, in middle school. As most of you know, we have the TSTT program, which is today's students, tomorrow's teachers. So it is a program where high school students are exploring and learning about teaching, and there's a designed curriculum that, in fact, 2 of our high school teachers, and you guys, think the kids came here last year. 2 of our high school teachers are working with those kids. We're growing that program in Brookline, and I'm excited to be meeting with Boston next week, who will be taking on this program. I want to add that Boston is going to take 50 students right away. We have 12. But we can talk more about that. So that's one of the things that the department is saying, maybe we all need to get on board with bringing these kids to the field of education much earlier. Additionally, the governor has an executive order 527, and which is at the state level. He signed it, I believe, in July 2011. And essentially, he created an office for access and opportunity. And so there's an office there, but most importantly there, in that office, there are a set of practices and standards that have to be evident in every single organization of the government. One being, every year there is training on diversity and equity. One being that they have transparent practices for their hiring, and they are very, very clear and transparent that they are looking to diversify. Lastly here, in general, I think we should, we always need to make sure that we have up-to-date and that we're enhancing our statements for diversity and equal opportunity. So, in terms of recruiting, what are we doing and what can we do? A lot of these things we're doing well. We can do more. We're advertising in broader and more diverse publications. We did that last year. We run an ad every year in the Teachers of Color Journal. We should continue to participate in local fairs and extend our job participation to regional levels, where there may be students in different areas in the Commonwealth and the New England area that are from more diverse backgrounds. The third one is just something that I've been talking to with some of my colleagues about, looking at the recruitment opportunities at some of the historically black colleges and universities, not only the top 3, Spelman, Morehouse, and Fisk, but some of those in the top 20 that are located right here on the East Coast, Lincoln University, Delaware State University. So making connections with some of those universities, they all have College of Educations and School of Educations, to see if we can come talk and talk to them about opportunities here in Brookline, but more importantly, find out, are those kids interested in coming here? What can we do to get them to come here? Maybe we can figure out how to do an internship here. So that's number 3. The next one is, we've talked to you about this last year, and we continued with this practice this year, and I have to say, I think it's made a huge difference. We're much more cognizant of looking at our candidates with this practice, and it is simply having an accountability process with our principals, and I should add, our coordinators, where appropriate, when they are actually involved with the hiring. And what that is we have been very intentional in asking the principals to let us know who were the candidates of color that they interviewed. We didn't say you have to hire the candidates of color. We want to know who are the candidates of color. And keep in mind, we are not compromising our excellence. We are still looking for highly qualified, effective educators. So who are those people that you interviewed? If you did not hire them, we just want to know why not. So with that data, we can use that to create a profile of candidates that would work in Brookline. I think by having people responsible, in particular our principals responsible for that, they're thinking differently. I get lots of phone calls during the hiring season about, Angela, there's a candidate here. Is it okay if they're not in School Springs that I talk to them? And absolutely. we can actually recruit people. Everyone doesn't have to complete an application in the school spring. So that's a good process, and I'm glad Bill, Dr. Lupini thought about that in terms of having the principal share the responsibility with us. Another thing that I've been talking to the town about, I go to all these job fairs, and what I typically do, I take a couple of principals with me. Last year, I actually took a couple of teachers of color with me. That really makes a difference because people are drawn to that table when they see lots of people from Brookline there. So it's always a lot of fun. But more importantly, we come out with a nice solid list of people that we like to talk to. And we share that with all of our principals. However, I sort of think that we can do that just here. I'm like, I don't want all those other people involved. I just want this room all to myself. So I've been talking to Sandra about hosting a school in town open house. Not a job fair, but early in the winter, hosting an open house where we have our department chairs from the town, where we have our principals, and where we're showcasing the town and we are showcasing the schools. This is who we are, this is what we do, and this is why you should want to work here. So we're opening the door. We want you here. Come look at us and who we are. So Sandra and I are hoping to put that together sometimes in February before we actually start our hiring process in the spring. Additionally, I like for us to look at opportunities for alternative licensure programs, similar to what Boston is doing with the BTR program. So I've talked to you about TSTT. We're going to be initiating a third cohort in 2015 next year. We just started with a new cohort of 6 more students, which is so exciting. I have to say that this program is in Andover, Lexington, Arlington, and Brookline, and we just got a new regional director. We've had a couple in the past, and every single one always reports the Brookline students are the most engaged. They go to conferences. As a matter of fact, I think today they actually went to Leslie University. Leslie University has just signed on to be a partner with TSTT. So these students who are graduating, this group here, this is our first group, they will be graduating next year. So not only will they have opportunities to go to some of the TSTT partnership schools in New York and Connecticut, but now they have the opportunity to go to Leslie. Leslie has offered to pay full tuition for those students. It's a proven program, and we like to expand that as well. We should also look at partnerships with, and this is actually more difficult than I thought, but we will continue to work on it, to look at partnerships with colleges and universities that have greater percentages of students of color enrolled. Our goal here is to find where are the students where's that 20% that's signing up for that MTEL test. One of the things that I failed to mention in terms of the work the task force is doing is, they've also talked about holding the universities accountable. We need you to do your part in getting more of these kids in the College of Education as well, which is why Leslie University signed on so easily, because they said it's a challenge for them as well, for them to have a direct pipeline of kids coming from schools into their education programs. They thought it was a no-brainer. So hopefully other universities in this area will sign up as well. I mentioned earlier we hire a great number of our paraprofessionals into our professional teaching staff. This year, of the 68, I want to say 10 or 11 of the teachers had been paraprofessionals. To that point, I want to say 8 had been interns in Brookline. So my theory is, once your face is in front of our teachers and in front of our leadership and our principals, and you are exceptional, your teaching is excellent, we want you to stay. So I like to figure out what can we do to do a better job of supporting the paraprofessionals of color who are interested in teaching. So maybe initiating some type of mentoring program for those people. Okay. And lastly, our retention efforts. So, as you know, we have a first and second and third year mentoring and induction program. What I really, really like about that is for our first year program, we continue to weave. We spend about 10 hours of our new teacher training on educational equity with our new teachers. And we weave those concepts in their learning throughout the year on a monthly basis. So they're continually learning about educational equity, which includes, issues of diversity and inclusion. And in the second and third year of the mentoring and induction program, they do a little bit of a deep dive. They actually do some reading, and they're meeting on a monthly basis, discussing, major concepts and issues around educational equity. As I think you heard the superintendent mention earlier, that the leadership team is reading the book How Children Succeed by Paul Tough, as is the second and third year teachers all across the district. And when we have those conversations, we're talking about what does equity look like in the context of how children succeed. So additionally, continue to engage in cultural proficient professional learning. I also like to collaborate with our teachers to form informal affinity groups for educators of color. And when I say that, last year we had a good number of Asian teachers who got together on their own. And I have heard, and I've attended some of those meetings, that it was really, really helpful to be able to share some of the challenges in one building, how they might have been similar or different to some of the challenges in another building. So we like to figure out how we can better support teachers doing that. This year, I had a teacher just ask me, is there someone like me that I can talk to? I gave her a teacher's contact information at another building. I contacted that teacher. They're spending a lot of time together. So I think those relationships and opportunity to be in those spaces are really important for teachers. Additionally, along those same lines is we can do a better job of helping teachers get connected with diversity networks. If they're not here, they're out there. And we need to identify them and let them know where they are. We have a lot of support here, but here's some other places where you might look to for some additional support. So I just have to make one little tidbit, a little comment about this photo. These are two of our new teachers in Brookline for this year. So they are in our numbers. I was so excited to be doing an observation in this classroom where there was actual co-teaching going on. So I was trying to capture the co-teaching. And when I went back to look at my photographs, I said, wow, isn't this something? I have two of the new teachers of color that are hired at one school in the classroom together teaching. You guys know I was the former math coordinator, so this was really exciting for me to capture this. So the idea that these two teachers have each other, I wondered if their, way of collaborating and co-teaching, I hadn't seen this in a lot of places to the extent I've seen it here. So I was excited about that, and I wondered if they were able to make some connections and make that happen in the classroom for those students. So that pretty much is it in terms of, what we're doing, what our teachers look like, what we're doing to get more of them that look that way, and to consider teachers that aren't just identified by their physical appearances, but other things that make them unique and different. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you.
Absolutely.
So I think Dr. Lupini might want to say a few
I
words.
do, just on a couple of points, just to elaborate on a couple of things that Dr. Allen said. The first is that there's a point in the middle of the next to the last slide about partnerships with colleges and universities. And that's really been a major issue for this school system. One of the things for a number of years here has been that we were very interested in these efforts. And we were also struggling with the fact that we had partnerships with colleges and universities who didn't send us interns and student teachers, didn't send us a diverse pool of interns and student teachers. And Dr. Allen has really done a great job of reaching out to other institutions to ensure that we're able to bring interns and student teachers to the district, because what we know in all school systems is that the principals are comfortable hiring people who they've been able to see for some period of time. And so if you have an intern in a building for a year or a student teacher for a semester, and you've had an opportunity to see them teach and see them work, you're much more comfortable with them than someone you're meeting just through an interview situation. So how do we get teachers from other types of institutions in front of them? And we've done a better job of that. The other place that I wanted to comment on here, where we need to do more work, and it's one of the great conversations going on through our MSAN groups, is really around what are you doing to the slides while I'm talking, Dr. Allen?
I'm like looking for Robin to come help.
The other issue is really around, well, that's okay, I'll go to the written material then, Dr. Allen. Is really around the mentoring program and the work that we do in terms of culturally proficient professional learning. We were just in Chapel Hill. Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I were both there, and in addition to seeing a new building that they'd built on the site of a formerly black elementary school and the black Lincoln High School that were there until the early 1960s, we got to hear from students who are involved. They've involved students in that effort. So they've taken the tact that they've done a lot of the research, students did the research, faculty members did the research around teaching practices that engage students of color. And they're delivering that work with their faculty through their students. So they have a team of 20 students who do professional development work with their faculty. Next year, they'll be forming a team of 20 middle school students and 20 elementary students who will begin to do that work with their staff. And we're seeing that in a number of the MSAN districts, that kind of work of taking those kinds of efforts around the cultural diversity and working with all teachers around those efforts with students. So I think that's something we'll be talking about, should we have the moment to sit down and actually talk about it. So thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
I don't know if you're off the hook yet. Let's wait and see. Are there questions from the committee? Yes. Ms. Kershaw.
Oh, and the inner urge to get home to the game, but I just asked to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for all your work. I know that it's hard, and you have come up with some creative ideas, and we're heading in the right direction here. So I had this thought last year, and I can't remember if I said it. So I think two pieces of information that we really need to understand better the progress we're making and the comparability is how the profile of our teachers is reflected in the student population. So I think much more important than how do we compare to Boston's teachers of color or Newton's or wherever is how does the percentage of teachers of color compare to the student population? I mean, I know obviously what we're trying to do is make sure that our teachers are reflective or getting in the right direction of reflective of the kids in the schools. And the second is the turnover rate. And I assume you're looking at that or you wouldn't be thinking about affinity groups and those kinds of things. So I think understanding the relative turnover rate for teachers of color and teachers not of color would be important for us to understand how we're doing.
The only comment, you're right, we should have those data, we don't. The basis for some of that work came years ago, actually in the interim between Steve Barrasso and Ann Wilson, back that when we did a series of focus groups. And we were told by our teachers that if they didn't see them, and it's tough because at that time we had small K-8 elementary schools, we're a little larger. Here's one of the advantages of size, right? There are many, yes. But one of the issues we had at that time is teachers told us, because you had buildings like Heath who were actually identifying issues in their recruitment efforts, in their school improvement plan and other places. Well, what teachers were telling us is they weren't going to stay if there weren't people who looked like them in that building, who they identified with. And so it was really Anne who at the time began to try to figure out ways to make those connections across buildings. We had a number of students, and some of you who've been, on the committee for a while, there were a number of people who reported to us that they gravitated to the devotion school because there were other Asian teachers at the devotion school. So they may have started in another building, but they didn't stay there long. They wanted to stay in the district, so that the minute there was an opportunity to go and take a classroom at devotion, they went because they saw themselves there. And so we have, A, much more of an opportunity to do that now, and B, this idea of figuring out ways to make connections across buildings and even outside of our district is very, very important.
Ms. Chalupsky.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. I think it's really amazing looking at it over the years, how we have increased our community of color in the staff. I think the idea of, getting people in as interns and as student teachers or even substitute teachers are, that's the way people get jobs. Whatever color you are, that's the way that people get jobs in systems oftentimes. We have, if I'm not mistaken, in the past, and I'm not sure there's anybody here who can help me, I think we have gone to the south to some of the historically, and maybe just to the south, maybe not to the ones that are closer to us, to some of the historically black colleges. And I think when we have hired people, from my recollection, and I would check this out, I guess that's my thought, and probably the person who remembers the best was the one before Steve Barrasso, who is...
Bill Rebus.
Thank you. Bill Rebus. He was the one who did it. That some of the teachers had difficulty just acclimating to the north.
Yep.
And the difference, and you would probably know that better than most, on those issues. But so it was... even though we may have recruited some people to come here, keeping them here was difficult. And maybe with the affinity groups and that sort of thing, that could help. But I think we had done that in the past.
So that has been some of the discussion with my job-alike colleagues in terms of recruiting. In fact, one of the recruitment fairs that we participate in, the Greater Boston School Network for Human Resources, it's about 10 districts, many of them that are listed here as comparable districts. And we actually sent, we identified all of the HBCUs, and we sent them personal invitations to the job fair. So we had people coming from all over. When we analyzed that data, there were more people in this region, Baltimore, Maryland. It's not as far away as Georgia.
Right.
Or Florida. So this year we're thinking, let's be more strategic and target Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania and see what we get versus just going broadly, because a lot of it is about, also these are young people, they want to be close to home.
Yeah.
Delaware's not that far. You can drive from Pennsylvania to here, so we're exploring all of those things, and we, to your point, we do not want to leave any stone uncovered. I should also add that some of the schools in the big three, Spelman, Morehouse, and Fisk, they're already in partnerships similar to what we have BTR here. They're in partnerships with school systems there, and there's again, they're predominantly black. However, there's a very small number of students who are majoring in education.
I guess just as a follow, may I? One follow-up?
Yes.
Thought, and I don't know how much power, and I will be
We
very
we
quick
have
because
all
we have
evening,
to
Ms.
go.
Chalupsky.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
But is there any way for us to pressure BU, who lives in our backyard, or actually in our front yard in some places, so that we get first choice at students of color? To sort of help them to understand that, they don't do they do somewhat of a pilot. This would be part of the pilot.
Can I just respond to that briefly, Mr. Morris? So last year, I actually went to a panel on interviewing practices for students coming out for teaching positions at BU, and I could have gone anywhere, but they invited me to BU. There were about 200 students in the audience, there to hear about the do's and don'ts for your resume, your cover letter, your interview. And of those 200-plus students in the huge auditorium, there were probably 3 students of color in that
Okay.
auditorium. So, I mean,
You answered the
I don't know if we could
question.
get pressure
You
them for
answered the
those
question.
3, but I made a beeline to those 3 after the workshop. So.
But that was a great idea, just going there and talking to them. Fantastic. Thank you.
Ms. Ditkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for not only your sustained attention to this issue, but also the progress that's been made. So thank you on all our behalfs. Just one comment. I think some of the discussion of diversity that you mentioned hinted that maybe one of the things that we might think about doing is expanding our definition of what diversity is. And certainly there are sort of, I think, speaking for myself, I would say that while that's a positive thing, because there are many different types of diversity, I just hope that it wouldn't ever take our attention off of historically underrepresented groups. So I guess I would say that. I think the second thing I might say is, while a lot of this focused on the hiring process, I am really interested in the retention question and what are things that make our district more or less interesting and attractive to different groups of people. And if there are patterns that we should be thinking about beyond ones that are focused on the groups themselves, meaning if there are patterns that we need to think about for the broader system, that's important to know also. And sometimes those are much more difficult and challenging conversations to have, but conversations about microaggressions or all sorts of other cultural things that happen. Certainly affinity groups can help, but that is still about the groups of individuals themselves rather than what the whole needs to look like. Or even in hiring processes, what signals are getting sent intentionally or unintentionally. So we didn't talk a lot about that, and that's okay, but it's on my mind, it might be on other people's minds. I know this is a hiring presentation, but anyway, I would just note those 2 things. And if there were some way to look at which candidates, I mean, in the corporate world, which I know a little bit about in terms of trying to increase diversity practices, at least one thing that happens is for any candidate whom the company interviewed and wanted but rejected the company, that there be essentially some deep understanding as to why. Similarly, if there's undesirable attrition, that there's sort of a deeper understanding as to why. So it's a slightly different way to think about this question, but I think it speaks more to sort of everyone else and what everyone else needs to be doing, not just the individuals themselves. So, but anyway, like I said, it's a big project. So thank you for, again, all of your attention and the clear progress that we've made.
Thank you.
Ms. Scotto?
Thank you for the report. It's heartening to see that we are improving in this area. One of the things, though, that I notice is one area of diversity that I don't think we are focusing as much on as we ought, and that is gender. If you look at our hiring this year, 25% of our new hires were men, 75% were women. That pretty much reflects the overall demographics of the professional staff. I would also guess, well, it's 20% male, 80% women in our overall demographics.
Right, and what Dr. Allen said is that nationally, it's 85-15, so.
We're doing better. Yes, we're doing better than nationally, but I don't think we're doing well enough there. And I say that because my guess would be that more than 50% of those males are working at the high school. And as a person who worked in the elementary school for years, I know that there are often very few male teachers in the elementary school, and particularly at the lower ends, and in the middle part of elementary as well. And I think that if we could really think about ways to increase that number, there are not very many men going into education. I know that from my, that's not true, but in going into elementary education, I know that from my work at Simmons and in other places. But it seems to be an area that would be good to add to our list of what we're looking for.
And we will, and just to respond briefly to that, Ms. Scotto, to give you, go just a tiny bit deeper, just for a moment, you are right. 35% of the teachers at the high school are males, and in our K-8 schools, 16%. Very reflective of the national demographics are male. So we will certainly, and I think our principals do here, really keep an, yes, Bill.
Yeah, just let me say that I think, so here's an advantage of our model. In the districts I've worked in before, you saw a much more pronounced profile in this area because you were talking about K through 5, and I think you'd agree that in a K through 5, you see less men in K through 5 than you do in 6 through 8. So the advantage of a K through 8 model is that there are men in the building. They may not be at those grade levels where you'd like to see them in the profile that you've laid out, and I think we would as well if there were people getting licensed in those areas. But there's a presence in the building, and given some of the work that we do between grade levels, students do have that opportunity. It is true. I mean, it is true that it's an area that we can pay attention to. We have some of the some similar problems in people getting licensed, in people actually looking at careers in those areas. Historically, I've done this for 19 years now. When you manage to find men who are interested in teaching first grade or kindergarten or second grade, you grab them and hold on, for all it's worth, because of what that truly brings to those schools. I've experienced that 5, 6, 7 times in my career. And unfortunately, it's becoming, if you're paying attention to the data that I know you're looking at, and I know Dr. Allen's looking at, it's becoming less prevalent. Men in the field, period. True where they are ending up, it's at the high school level, but even less so at the elementary level than before.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Allen. Terrific presentation, clear as a bell.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, is there any other business that anyone would like to conduct tonight? Seeing none, I'll declare this meeting adjourned.
After 1.
0-0. How do you get out of it?
Just walking out.
I don't know.
She was taking...
Get rid of that. That. Oh, my God almighty. Okay. So even me.